Welcome to Ship It, a podcast about ops, infrastructure, and teams with shared responsibilities. Today, we are talking with Maikel Vlasman, technical lead for a large Dutch machine construction company and a cloud engineer by heart. We cover self-updating GitLab and ArgoCD, Maikel's thinking behind dev environment setup, and a Kubernetes workshop that he's preparing for his team. The goal is to function as a true DevOps team with shared responsibilities. This conversation started as a thread in our community Slack. Link in the show notes. Thank you, Maikel, for being a long-time changelog listener and for reaching out to us. I enjoyed telling this story. I also enjoyed asking honeycomb.io, in the last 7 days, which of our Fastly edge locations served the most traffic? The answer came in 427 milliseconds. Washington DC is first, Frankfurt is second, and Paris is third. Fastly serves 90% of all our traffic with minimal latency, straight from their edge locations. Learn more at fastly.com.
This episode is brought to you by Acuity, a new platform that brings fully managed ArgoCD and enterprise services to the cloud or on-premise. The platform is a versatile Kubernetes operator for handling cluster deployments the GitOps way. And I'm here with Kelsey Hightower, angel investor and advisor to Acuity. Kelsey, why are you excited about ArgoCD and what's happening here with Acuity?
When I think about ArgoCD, it represents the transition from traditional CI/CD. You have a big server with a built-in workflow engine, and you can only do what that system can do, whether it's Jenkins, whether it's Spinnaker, you name it. Those things tend to be all-in solutions, and they're all predicated on having their own built-in workflows, UIs, and ways of doing things. And then when I think about kind of the ArgoCD, that whole open source movement kind of backed by the ideas we saw in the Kubernetes world, which was each of those steps is nothing more than just a step in a workflow. And after 10, 20 years of doing CI/CD, how best to represent those steps? And it turns out this whole container thing is probably the best way to have little snippets of logic sit at each of those steps in the workflow, and then you can kind of exchange them and share them to build any pipeline you want. So the way to look at this is Kubernetes has never had a workflow engine or tool. And so when you think about kind of Argo workflow or ArgoCD, which is kind of a specialized workflow, kind of attacking the how do you roll out software problem, that's the way I would think about it. So if you're all in on Kube and you like the Kubernetes ecosystem, then you kind of have a choice of workload types. And I would probably just say it's another workload type you can put in your toolbox. So if you got something that can benefit from a workflow engine and reuse the logic that you already have in containers, it kind of feels like the perfect fit.
The perfect fit. All right. Thanks, Kelsey. Well, the next step is to head to acuity.io/changelog. They are inviting all of our listeners to join the closed beta. Again, acuity.io/changelog. Links are in the show notes.
We are going to ship in 3, 2, 1.
2 months ago, Maikel reached out via Slack and he said, "Hi all, this long-time listener from when changelog was on the 5x5 network has finally joined the Slack." I like that you referred, Maikel, to yourself in the third person. That was very good. You definitely impacted my career and love for the open source community. Big love and thank you. Maikel, I'm very happy to welcome you here today on Ship It. Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
So these are my favorite stories, the long-term ones. When was, by the way, the 5x5 network? How long ago was that, Maikel?
I looked it up. It was in 2009 when you joined 5x5.
Wow.
And I listened to other podcasts in that network. And so I also came across this one. And in that time, I was really busy with Docker. And in 2013, there was a talk from Solomon Hykes in the Twitter meeting where I learned about Docker. So that was my inspiration to go full on web development.
Wow. So the tweet from Solomon inspired you to go into web development full time?
Yeah, I came across that demo from the first Docker intro.
That's okay. I'll mention it to him. I'm sure he'll be very glad to hear that. Okay. So what inspired you? I'm very curious from that tweet. What was it?
It showed me that the world is going to change with the technology which Docker provides us. So I even set my study on hold to fully focus on Docker and to learn the technology. And then that full year I did over for school for my study because I thought it would change the world. And next year I had an internship at a company where I introduced Docker. And then later on Kubernetes, and that was a great success. So I'm very, very thankful for Docker and Kubernetes, of course.
Are you still using Docker today?
Yes, but I use another tool like Rancher Desktop and more like the OCI general tools which are available.
Okay, but when it comes to running your applications, the ones that you're part of, you're not using Docker in production to run them. You're just using Docker locally. Well, you're using Rancher Desktop locally to build images, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it's quite a different setup nowadays. I'm using Canico to building the images in the cluster itself. So
So that is used with Kubernetes. Do you have a local Kubernetes or do you target a remote Kubernetes?
Yeah, it's a local Kubernetes cluster with Rancher, and that one builds images.
Okay, you're using Canico. Okay, that's good to know. Okay. Cool. Okay. See, sidetracked by technology. Like, can you tell I'm a nerd for this? Like, whenever I hear things like that, like, yes, tell me more. Okay. So when you introduced yourself 2 months ago, you said that you're a cloud engineer by heart. What did you mean by that? And specifically, what does it mean to you to be a cloud engineer?
For me, it's a way to enable the developers in the team and UX designers to deliver the software. So full on focus on the developer experience. From the moment you're beginning to code to when it's in a feature site or review app to production. So I'm focused on make that experience great, so their potential can be used to the full extent.
So if cloud shipper was a role, I think you're a cloud shipper. You're shipping code into the cloud. Okay, what is the difference between what you just mentioned and a platform engineer?
I think as a cloud within the team, you have more connection with your development team. So you stand a lot closer to them, and you can discuss. I think you are more integrated into the project, for example.
Okay, I know that the platform engineers are more about the self-service model. So what do they need to build so that others can just consume it themselves via docs, via APIs, and less about, helping them go through that and provision things or set things up. So I think it would help me understand a bit better if you were to describe your day-to-day. Like, what does your day-to-day look like when it comes to interacting with the engineers, with the admins? Do you have admins? I'm not sure whether you have admins, like people. No. So no infrastructure, ops sort of people. Okay. And the front end.
Oh, sorry. We have admins.
Yep, that's fine. So when it comes to your day-to-day, what does it look like when it comes to interacting with all those different types of roles within the company?
Now, for now, we are migrating from on-premise to cloud. So for now, it's mainly setting up the new stuff, the greenfield. And the challenge is for me now to keep the engineers so that they can keep the work going. And so that they aren't blocked in their work.
So do you have mostly back-end developers that just develop APIs, or like what do the engineers develop?
Yeah, it's both front-end and back-end.
And do you have the SRE type or the ops types, the ones that look after the systems, or are they fully managed? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we have multiple people, and some people are we dependent upon, so they do a lot of database actions. Other people don't focus purely on front end, and others purely on back end. My goal also is for the team to be able to, so that everyone can, for example, add a environment variable to a deployment if they need to have that. So, and that they don't depend on some ops person to do that.
That's nice. So that's that self-service model where people know how to make the changes. There must be some documentation, I imagine, that they can look up. They know how to make the change. And when the change is made, and I think this is like a bit of the GitOps model, it's in a repository, it gets merged, it gets applied to the environment. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
So what does your stack look like? I'm wondering, because that will help me understand a bit better in terms of the technology that you use, whether it's front-facing, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's multiple things. What does that look like?
So we have the Greenfield new cloud environment. It contains Terraform, first of all. It's with one push of on a button, it's be able to deploy all what's needed. So like a Kubernetes cluster, VPCs and all that.
Where does this Terraform run? Sorry to interrupt.
For now, it runs in Azure DevOps.
Okay.
We tied to that one. The goal is to have it in GitLab CI because it enables us to be a bit more flexible, and we think it's the more mature platform for how it works. And also, I'm a big fan of GitLab myself, so that's why.
So GitLab is the CI/CD system or just the CI system?
Both.
Both. Okay. So GitLab, CI/CD, and you have some pipelines that provision infrastructure that is provisioned using Terraform. The infrastructure is Kubernetes, other things other than Kubernetes clusters?
Mainly Kubernetes, and the database is separately managed by another team for now.
Okay.
But maybe in the future it moves also to cloud.
And where do you provision the Kubernetes clusters?
Yeah, it's in Azure for now, but we have made it so that it's also available in able to roll out in GKE, for example.
Okay.
So we made it cloud agnostic as much as possible, so we can move to another cloud if that's required.
So when after Kubernetes comes up and there's this managed database that comes up, what happens next?
Yeah, for now the managed database is not in place yet, so it's for the future. But we have ArgoCD installed via that Terraform script. So in the Terraform applied, it creates ArgoCD with the Helm chart. Then it pulls down from the Git repo. It pulls down the root application, ArgoCD application. And from that one, it spins up all necessary tools. For example, the an ingress controller and a ArgoCD itself is also managed by Argo. So that's also quite a nice thing to be able to manage Argo through Argo.
That's very interesting. I mean, if Argo manages itself, what happens if it's upgrading itself and it's still running? Will the run fail?
Well, in the end, it can fail if there's a missing chart value, for example. But we're going to set up the Prometheus monitoring to log that, and then it notifies us that it's been failed. But if you are upgrading Argo to the latest release, what you'll face on the UI, so you see that it fails.
But what I'm wondering is if Argo is upgrading itself, Argo's running while it's upgrading, the upgrade gets applied, which means that the run will have to be stopped, right? Because it just needs to basically restart with a new version. And when that happens, how does it continue the upgrade because the upgrade failed? Because it was updated? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. So it's using the deployments, for example, for the controller. So it tears down the old controller when the new controller is up. So in that way, it keeps running. Yeah, I tested it thoroughly, so it worked for quite a few releases now. So
is this a done thing where like a service can update itself in Kubernetes? I think like this is a very interesting pattern which I haven't seen.
Yeah. So first of all, when Terraform is applied, it fetches the local repository from our GitLab instance. It looks at the values of that ArgoCD, and then it's for one time it does a local Helm install, and from there on it watches that root app repository, and then then ArgoCD takes over that initial Helm install upgrade.
Okay.
That initial Helm install. So that way we can update the version of Argo, and then it will be released in the cluster.
Now, this sounds very interesting. Do you have some code that is publicly available for me to look at just to see how you configure this? Because this is super interesting to me.
Yeah, I can make it available. It's okay.
Yeah, that'll be very nice to see how ArgoCD can update itself without any downtime And then when the run finishes, it succeeds, and Argo itself is at a new version. That is very cool.
And that same one applies to how I used to administer GitLab. So a self-hosted version of GitLab. So we also wanted with that GitLab instance once a month at least, with the patch releases, I needed to roll a script and then update GitLab, and I was tired of that. So just like Kelsey Hightower mentioned in the previous episode, when you want to automate it, first you have to know exactly how you do it manually. And so that was also a great lesson from Kelsey Hightower. So I started off upgrading that by myself. So I automated the whole process. Okay. So it was once a night, there will be run a GitLab CI job on a schedule, which checks if there's a new release or a new patch release of GitLab. And then it creates a merge request for itself. So there's a CI which creates a merge request and assigns it to the administrator. And then the administrator can merge that merge request. And then GitLab will, using GitLab CI, it will apply itself to the cluster. And then it's upgraded.
So in this case, we're talking about a self-hosted GitLab that is running on Kubernetes. And you're merging the pull request, which changes, basically upgrades GitLab, which then GitLab runs and it gets upgraded. It basically upgrades itself in Kubernetes. Okay. And again, no downtime. I'm surprised by this. No downtime.
Well, it depends. If it's a major release with migrations for the database, you have downtime. But we were a small company with 10 people. So that was, it went smooth.
Yeah, I'm still missing the piece because if there is so there's like this piece which I'm missing around how can an upgrade continue running if the system that runs it will be taken down?
That's a good question. In the case of GitLab, it's quite easy because the CI is there are different deployments, different pods than where GitLab itself is hosted. So as long as that job runs, it takes care of the upgrade in Kubernetes.
But won't that job be upgraded part of the upgrade? Because that's also GitLab, right? That runs that job. So the job that runs will upgrade itself, which means it will have to terminate, which means it will not know whether it succeeded or not because it's running the upgrade.
So when a GitLab runner gets terminated because of the upgrade, it first waits until all jobs it has assigned to it will succeed or finish. So in that case, the Helm chart upgrade in that CI job will it will wait for that to succeed.
But then it can't upgrade itself. So like the job will not go down because it's still running and it's waiting for itself to be upgraded. So how does that work?
It's quite a challenge to say in words, to describe it in words.
Do we need a diagram? I think we need a diagram.
Yeah, I need a diagram.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, because that will definitely help explaining this. Okay. I remember because I was involved with like similar systems that would upgrade itself. Concourse was one CI that we were using Concourse to upgrade itself. But when that was upgrading itself, like it would apply the upgrade, the job would be forced terminated, the one that was upgrading itself. So the job would fail, but the job would be configured to retrigger itself. So when the job would be scheduled again because it hasn't finished, so it will need to retry, the job would start from the beginning. It would say, oh, this has already been done. So it was idempotent, exactly. It was like trying to apply the same upgrade. But the second time when it would run, it would succeed because it would see the upgrade actually was successful. And the first time when it ran, it was basically aborted, but the job was aborted, not the upgrade. I mean, that was like still running because once you give the instruction to whatever it's upgrading, in this case, it was Bosch that was basically managing the upgrade. The upgrade would go through, but Concourse wouldn't know whether it succeeded or failed. And they would like try to apply it again. And then it would talk like to the Bosch director in that case. And this is not too dissimilar from the Kubernetes controller, or like shall I say the control plane. So the control plane would know what the state is, and then the job would succeed on the retry because, oh, guess what? The update has already been applied. So that is how I've seen it work. But again, the initial run would fail.
In our case, it wouldn't fail. It would succeed. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I really want to see the diagram. That's what I'm thinking.
That's cool.
That's super interesting. Okay.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Raygun. They give software teams instant visibility into the quality and the performance of their software. And I'm here with John Daniel Trask, co-founder and CEO of Raygun. JD, would you say Raygun is focused on monitoring or, in quotes, observability? How do you draw the line? Is it monitoring or is it observability?
Yeah, I tend to find our industry gets super hung up on labels and what their definitions are. You see the constant battle of, is observability really just traces, logs, and metrics, or is it more? And it's like, well, to me, at the end of the day, I think of it as the objective, which is allow me to fix issues fast and understand how to debug them quickly. And if I can do that, I don't really care if it was from a metric, a log, or whatnot. Just help me solve problems quickly. And so Raygun absolutely provides a level of observability, and I would class it as the classical term of monitoring. But say our APM product, most APMs these days are doing great stuff with things like spans and, measure these things. Raygun's APM does method level profiling right down to it, very low overhead, and when people bring that in and they go, hang on, so this integrates with my source control, I can look at the code, I can see down to the lines of how long this is taking to execute. That's actually a level I find of observability that isn't in a lot of the observability companies' capabilities, right? They have high level span saying, well, this service took this long. It's like, cool, but how long did the methods inside it take? I want to understand more than just the slow SQL statements. I want it to proactively identify code smells, which is, again, another difference that Raygun's APM has. Our vision is to try and have Raygun feel like it's a virtual team member working 24/7 on your side, identifying things and helping give you the context to fix them. To me, that's observability.
Well said, JD. All right, head to raygun.com to learn more and start your free 14-day trial. No credit card required. Join thousands of customer-centric software teams who use Raygun every single day to deliver flawless experiences to their customers. Again, raygun.com.
So I know that a lot of users are using GitHub and GitHub Actions. Not that many, again, from the ones that I'm talking to, are using GitLab. What made you choose GitLab?
The GitLab CI was a while back part of GitLab itself, way before GitLab Actions was introduced. And that made it very easy to set up GitLab. That made it very easy to set up the CI system. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there were some features in GitLab I found very useful. For example, if you got a README, then you could show the source files in the web UI. Mm-hmm. And a lot of features, they weren't in GitHub yet. They are added now, but and also GitLab has once a month release with a lot of features every month added.
Nice.
So that was very nice. And also for us it was very important to have a self-hosted GitLab, so we could upgrade to our needs if we wish.
How long have you been using GitLab for? How many years?
Actually, I started with GitLab 8 in 2013, also around that same year, when they still had that the old Tanuki icon, the non-orange one.
I don't remember that one, I have to say. Okay, so the original GitLab icon.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I came across them by a DistOcean post. DistOcean had a lot of tutorials, which I learned a lot from. So that's what, and then I set it up at first at my home server for the first time. And then CI was added, integrated in the GitLab CI, in the GitLab. And at my job back then, in my internship, I introduced GitLab. Mm-hmm. So we, with all those nice features and feature sites and new shiny things. Mm-hmm. GitLab and GitHub has quite a lot in common these days. Mm-hmm. But back then it was the feature set differed a lot.
Okay, so in the almost 10 years since you have been using GitLab, did you have some upgrades that didn't work very well because you were self-hosting it? Any issues that you ran into it while you were running it yourself that you wish you hadn't?
Yeah, the upgrades back then were not always that smooth. So, for example, mainly the major upgrades were not so smooth.
So like 8 to 9, 9 to 10. Is that what you're thinking about?
No, also the minor upgrades.
Okay.
There were bugs introduced, and then we had the option for ourselves to go back to the previous version of GitLab. That was also a reason why we went to self-host. So we have that. We didn't want to upgrade GitLab before a major client project update.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And would you ever run migrations? So rather than upgrading in place, would you, like blue-green, you'd stand another GitLab and then you'd migrate the data? Have you ever done that?
No.
Okay, so always in place upgrades.
Yeah, we had backups, of course, for all. So in theory, we could go back with an old database.
Okay, so apart from like a few issues with upgrades, things were fairly straightforward. You didn't have like days and days of things where you couldn't use GitLab because something didn't work. Okay, so everything was fairly easy to navigate when problems did happen. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. And you still use GitLab today?
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. And where does Azure DevOps, or Azure DevOps as some pronounce it, fit with GitLab? How do the two work? Because you have three. You have Azure DevOps, or Azure DevOps, as I call it, GitLab, and ArgoCD. How do the three work together? Plus, obviously, Terraform, but that's for something else.
So it all starts with Azure DevOps in our setup. And that one is responsible for applying the Terraform infrastructure as code. And in those repositories, there are references to GitLab, where the other code is hosted.
Okay.
So they're not tied into each other with API or something.
I see. And ArgoCD gets deployed on the cluster, and then ArgoCD manages the application. So you don't use GitLab or Azure DevOps to deploy the app. You're not using those.
No.
Okay, so ArgoCD manages the app. So I remember that we got up to ArgoCD. So ArgoCD does deploy one app, multiple apps. How does that setup look like?
For now, it deploys the infrastructure which is needed. So Argo itself, the GitLab runners, the GitLab agent, also the ingress controller. And we want to have it so that the applications, the company applications, the actual workload is also managed through Argo. For now, ArgoCD manages the infrastructure-related workload. So, for example, the ingress, the GitLab runner, and the GitLab agent, and some other infrastructure tools. And for now, the workload is deployed using GitLab CI, like a push model. So GitOps push. The downside of that is that you need to deploy them if you got a brand new cluster. You need to deploy them actively. So in contrast to a GitOps pull model, which ArgoCD is using, in that case, the infrastructure as code is as is, and you can just continue where you left off. So we want to, in the end, we want to integrate also the workload applications managed through ArgoCD.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I mean, some of that is coming back from our Kubernetes days, where when we were running our application on Kubernetes, we would start with the latest. So whatever was latest at that point in time, that's what would be pulled down. But we didn't have a declarative model that specified these are all the things that you need to be running part of this cluster. So it was still like you would set up like the initial tools, and then like you would deploy a bit more and a bit more, like more of the dependencies, until you would eventually be able to deploy the application. I know what you mean when you say that ArgoCD isn't managing the deployment currently, but it's like that push model. GitLab does like a push deploy of the app. Okay.
The upside of using a GitHub push model with GitLab CI to deploy your application is that you see in your logs of GitLab CI, you see what's eventually or what's potentially is going wrong. So you see a failed state.
Right. Yeah. So GitLab is showing you when a deployment fails versus ArgoCD showing you when a basically apply failed.
So if you use automated task to release your application, it creates just a commit. But that's not showing you if the deployment fails. So that's quite that's a challenge we have to accommodate for.
So when it comes to all those different systems that do things to your infrastructure, how do you basically understand what is the source of truth, what is running where? Because GitLab does something, Argo does something else. How do you reconcile all of these systems into a single view?
Yeah, we made the documentation for that. That's a simple answer. That so everyone can just continue working on it. When I'm on vacation, the goal is that everybody can just go along and also edit the infrastructure.
Okay, so there is a document that people can read to understand where the different endpoints are, what basically the things to check are, whether it's the ArgoCD UI, whether it's the GitLab pipeline view, whatever the case may be, where they can go and see what the current state of the world is.
I'm planning to organize a Kubernetes workshop for my team, so I can also explain to them how those things are working. So everybody have a nice understanding on the setup.
So would you expect your team members to use kubectl or kubectl?
Yeah.
Kubectl, which one do you prefer? Hang on, this is really important. How do you call the tool, the CLI for Kubernetes? How do you call it?
I always say kubectl.
Kubectl. Okay, good. I know there's like so many pronunciation. It's important to use the one that you prefer. Yeah. Okay, so would you expect your team members to use kubectl directly?
Yeah, they ask for it. It feels like the same as asking for SSH access to me.
Okay.
So I also always think about, there is a goal behind that why would they want kubectl? And mainly it's because of logs. They want to see the application logs.
Logs, okay, yeah.
Yeah. On the roadmap, we also now have a goal to add Loki as a logging system. So when that's set up, they don't need access to the cluster directly.
So you're setting up all these clusters. Would you think of centralizing the logs? How that work? Because I imagine you have a production cluster, or like, first of all, how do you slice up your clusters? Is it per environment? Is it per application? How does that look like?
Yeah, it's per environment.
Per environment.
So we have development, acceptance, production clusters.
Okay, so you have 3 clusters, and are you thinking of running low-key in each of them?
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that. It's still a discussion point. The same applies to Argo itself. I heard somewhere or read somewhere that it's not very recommended to host ArgoCD in that same cluster it's managing. So I would go about to split it into a separate repository of a separate cluster. And that also applies to the logging system and the monitoring system like Prometheus. So we have to think about that one.
Yeah, when you rotate the clusters, when the clusters go away, or you don't have just the 3, there's a 4th one, then you have like N places to look for things. And it's nice because it's self-contained. But then it makes you wonder, well, shall I have a single system to centralize all these things? And then maybe you're thinking, should I maybe, I don't know, have a managed service for this, have a service for logs, just as you have one for database, so that you don't have to run those things yourself. Because then, there's a contract, there's a commercial contract. And I know that in Europe, it can be a little bit challenging because of data privacy and like all sorts of regulations around data. And that's why maybe the choice isn't as broad as it's in the US, but it's still better than having to worry about your logging system or your metric system or whatever the case may be. And that's just like a service that you consume.
Indeed. And there's also a cost to managing it. So you have to maintain it.
Exactly. Apply upgrades and you know how fun those are, right?
Yeah. Especially if there's a Log4j CVE going around. And it's quite tricky to do it yourself.
So where do you stand on that? Would you prefer to have a managed service or would you like to run it yourself? What would you prefer?
Yeah, the nice thing about running it yourself, I found that you are in control of when you upgrade and when not. That's the main benefit of running it yourself.
So would you run it yourself?
Yeah, for now, I think I would run it myself because if you make the maintenance story easy for everyone, even with tools like Dependabot or RenovateBot, you just have a merge request and then merge it, and you are able to see that the rollout goes well. Then the maintenance burden is should be low. But I can see why people choose for a cloud solution. Yeah,
I mean, since you run GitLab self-hosted, I kind of could have guessed which way you're going. Like you would prefer to run your service self-hosted. And I think for you, because you're based in Europe, I think the data protection and the data regulations are much easier to work with, right? Because all the data, you know where it is, all of it. So you don't have to worry about, well, where does this service put it? And you have to figure out which region you want and a couple of other things.
But also, when you got the route to a SaaS offering, then you have to get people along with you, which are higher up the stack, higher up the organization, which is in a large company sometimes a great challenge.
Okay, so you're saying that the company itself prefers, like the leadership prefers for you to run everything yourselves versus using managed services or like software as a service?
Yeah, maybe not, but it's the easy route is to host it yourself. It's practically in practice that's the easy route.
Okay.
This episode is brought to you by Sentry. Build better software faster, diagnose, fix, and optimize the performance of your code. More than 1 million developers and 68,000 organizations already use Sentry, and that includes us. Here's the easiest way to try Sentry. Head to sentry.io/demo/sandbox. That is a fully functional version of Sentry that you can poke at. And best of all, our listeners get the team plan for free for 3 months. Head to sentry.io and use the code changelog when you sign up. Again, sentry.io and use the code changelog. And by Chronosphere. When it comes to observability, teams need a reliable, scalable, and efficient solution so they can know about issues well before their customers do. They need a solution that helps them move faster than the competition. And companies born in the cloud-native era often start with Prometheus for monitoring, which is obviously an amazing piece of software, but they quickly push it to its limits and often outgrow it. They run into issues with siloed data, missing long-term storage, and wasted engineering time firefighting the monitoring system versus delivering their application with confidence. They describe the system as a house of cards, where a single developer's seemingly benign change can overload the whole monitoring system, or they say they're flying blind because they pride themselves on making data-driven decisions, but losing visibility means they lose this competitive edge. Ryan Sokol, VP of Engineering at DoorDash, has this to say about Chronosphere, quote, "The visibility and control that Chronosphere's platform gives us to manage our observability data and costs are a game changer, especially with our unprecedented growth," end quote. Chronosphere is the observability platform for cloud-native teams operating at scale. Learn more and get a demo at chronosphere.io. Again, chronosphere.io.
So I know that via your message, because when we talked in Slack, there was like quite a few things which we exchanged. You told me that your goal in life is to make things easier for people.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that. We mentioned Kubernetes, we mentioned workshops, we mentioned self-hosted services. How does making things easier for people work out in practice with all these tools and technologies and the people? Let's not forget them.
So in my study, I studied Informatica, which is computer science in America, and did with a specialty in human-centered design. So human-centered design is about user experience design and make it easy for the user. And I get thrown into the infrastructure side of things because I was very interested in that. And I applied, some principles into the infrastructure side of things. So I say that I think that getting started must be fast. You have to just clone a repository, and the README should guide you as fast as possible to get started and to get to your goal. I would say it should be possible to contribute to a project on your first day of work. But then you go into the story of some people want to use a IntelliJ IDE. Some people want a VS Code IDE, and another one uses Vim, for example. And that's get fragmented. Then the configuration gets fragmented. So that's quite a challenge to align all those. So, for example, your prettier formatter should be usable in all circumstances. But it must be possible in the repository to add your own workflow, to apply your own workflow.
Okay, so how does this translate to your company and the team that you're part of? Are they able to, I mean, first of all, is there like a single repository that they clone and that's how they get started? Are there multiple repositories? What is the starting point?
Yeah, we started with multiple repositories, but we now are migrating to a monorepo.
Mm-hmm.
So code sharing between the applications is easy. So the README is the first step to read, and that implies fetching credentials. So where to get credentials?
Where do they get credentials from? That's an interesting one because there's so many answers to that. Everyone does it differently.
Yeah, we have systems within a company, in the company, so a single sign-on. Mm-hmm. So that's how it's been set up, and then you have to create some tokens for yourself, and then you can use that locally.
So the tokens are the tokens to get credentials, or are the tokens the credentials that users use?
In that last part, the tokens are then the credentials you use in your local setup.
But what about, for example, like the database credentials or the Kubernetes ones, right? If you don't use the database, or some like even like I think for GitLab it's easy, right? Because you log in with your company username. So use like use OpenID or OpenID Connect, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Auth, sure. What I'm wondering about is the application, the credentials which need to like do they stand everything up locally and then the credentials get just generated? How does that look?
Yeah, for now it's you have to fetch them from external, but in the end we want to I want to be able to create a system where you just need one secret for your personal, and then that secret is can grant you to the database and other systems. That's the goal.
Okay,
we're not there yet.
So when it comes to storing secrets, where do you store secrets for the apps?
Now some are just need to be entered in the application, like a file .env file, for example. Mm-hmm. So it's just Git ignored. It's not in Git stored. So
we do something very similar for our application. Our source of truth for secrets, the changelog, is still LastPass, but we want to migrate to Vault. So that's what we're thinking. 1Password, that's something which I used LastPass for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And it was like the easiest thing. So let's just put them there. Let's just like create a shared folder, and that's how we're going to share the secrets between, like, we're just a small team. Yeah. That has like its own challenges. It is a service, so, But you still have to make a manual action when you install your project. Yes. So there's something to run exactly to set up, and it basically generates the .env file. So in our case, it's make.env, and then that file gets generated from LastPass. And if you were to delete it, and if you regenerate it again, it will just get the latest values from LastPass. That's how that works. So you want to be able to use Vault? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And are you planning to use the cloud version, just the managed version? So that's something which I don't know, to be honest. I'll have some people from HashiCorp in a future episode to talk about this. Like, how should we reuse Vault? What are the options? Because that's exactly what I don't know. I know it's time to move from our current setup to something better. I mean, we've been talking for a while to improve it. It was never like high enough the list. But I think the time is right for us to have a better source of truth. And I think I would prefer it to be managed. Again, this goes back to the conversation which I had with Kelsey. The database should be managed, everything documented. And I think secrets, we should have a service for that, for sure. Yeah, because it's quite a beast to manage it your own, because the impact is quite high if you lose access to some systems. Yeah, and then as you should always have a backup. I mean, that's something that if you had to recreate things, that should be fairly easy to recreate. Again, I don't know how we would encrypt that, because we need to somehow encrypt it. That's something to think about for sure, with GPG or... Yeah. For now, we also use, of course, TLS certificates, and we're not using a Let's Encrypt system like Cert Manager, because the certificates are just with our own CA from the company. So the way it was fixed
previously was they were using GitLab CI variables. No, previously they were using encrypted secrets in Git with the SOPs, like the Mozilla tool. But then I came across the sealed secrets operator from Bitnami. Did you heard about it?
Yes.
So we're now storing the TLS certificates like a sealed secret in Git. So you are able to distribute your secrets safely.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. I can see the appeal of that. The problem with that approach is that you don't know where your secrets are, like all the places where your secrets are, because they're not being spread. Like as long as there's like a Git clone of your repo, there is a copy of your secrets there. So I think storing secrets in Git, it has some applications, some benefits, but I'm on the fence. I'm not sure if it's the best idea. I tried it myself, and in certain contexts with certain teams, we even do that. But I think I would prefer to have a single source of truth, which is managed, where all the secrets are stored, and then we pull from that. And I don't think I would like the secrets. I would give the actual secrets if possible. I would give something that can easily be rotated and something that is rotated, so that when you want to expire them or, like basically refresh all your secrets, it's easy to do so. And then everyone can get them without having to reclone, configure things. So I see the appeal of setting connections to your source of truth where the secrets are and having a way of refreshing everyone's view. The ones that still have access, by the way, to the secrets, because I think that's the whole idea. So you're focusing on the connections rather than absolutes, like absolute files or things like that. Ephemeral things which can get updated on the fly.
It's also possible to reference them, like in Kubernetes, for example, references a secret name in your code.
Yeah.
So then your secret is not stored locally, but when you deploy on your Kubernetes cluster in the cloud using, for example, DevSpace, it references that secret, and it can use that, but you don't have it stored in your Git repository.
Interesting. So hang on. Are you suggesting to develop in Kubernetes? Because that's crazy interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So I said it was, my mantra was getting started must be fast. So a lot of time is spent when developing locally is to set up your system. So you want to take all that work to the cloud. So we have a Kubernetes cluster, especially for development. And then you run DevSpace. The only tool you need is DevSpace, which is devspace.sh. And that tool is able to spin up your infrastructure Helm chart for your application, and then synchronize your local files to the cluster. And when you make a file change, it recompiles, and then you can use the power of the cloud to develop for your own environment.
Okay.
So it's kind of a remote development environment.
Interesting. What's the latency like?
It's quite fast. Yeah. I don't have numbers on that, but it zips them. It zips the changes and then deploys them. It mirrors them, and vice versa also. So I use it a lot last week, for example, when running a Prettier on the front-end code. And it works great.
How does this compare to like GitHub Codespaces or Gitpod? Is it something similar or?
So I shared with you that matrix with 4 environments, and it's the third option.
So for our listeners, let's go through what this is. We will put it in the show notes for sure. We have 4 options. The option 1, local native. Option 2, local Kubernetes. Option 3, the one that you're talking about, Maikel, is remote Kubernetes. And option 4 is all remote. So Gitpod, GitHub Codespaces would be all remote, option 4.
Yeah.
Option 3 is a local IDE. It's using DevSpace for the CLI. And there's a remote Kubernetes vCluster. Nice. So are you using vCluster to provision Kubernetes clusters for every single developer? Is that how that works?
For now, I'm only the user of the cluster, but for the future, that's the plan to use vCluster. So everybody has their own cluster for toying around.
And all of this runs in a single big development cluster, or like not big as much as like an actual Kubernetes clusters, but the users, they get virtual clusters.
Yeah.
Okay. And they use the local IDE, and DevSpace synchronizes the files to 2. Okay, that's interesting.
So the difference between option 3 and 4 is that your files are in your local IDE and not in a remote. Because, like I said, people want to have a custom environment on their laptop using Vim or another editor. So that's the benefit of using option 3.
Okay. And does it work on, on an iPad? Can you use the DevSpace CLI on an iPad?
I didn't try it, but I wonder.
Okay. I wonder too, because I know people that use iPads for development. They're great battery-wise, very portable, and the code runs elsewhere. So Gitpod, I think there's something like that for Gitpod. I think
option 4 definitely runs on an iPad.
Yeah.
Because what's the benefit of using option 3 on an iPad if you also need an IDE for it? So I don't think that would work
unless there's a good IDE for iPads, which I don't know. But that's indeed. Okay. All right. Yeah, you're right. I think in that case it's all remote, right? Everything runs remote, even the IDE. Okay. Yeah. So how long have you been using this option 3, where you use DevSpace to synchronize files to this remote Kubernetes where everything runs? How long have you been using this?
I've been playing around with it for a year now. Yeah. And actually it came from in the previous company I worked for, we were using Docker Compose for local development. So all projects were set up using Docker. So with Docker Compose, you have your file changes synchronized. But the con of that is that in the end, for example, you have an Nginx configuration in front of your project. And with Docker Compose, all those, you would set it up in the help charts. But when you're using Docker Compose, you are not having an actual representation of your production environment. So DevSpace is like the Docker Compose in your Kubernetes story.
Okay. I haven't tried DevSpace out, but this conversation makes me want to go and check it out and see how well it works. Did you blog about this, or do you have like more details about how you use it and what works well and your setup?
Yeah, I'm planning to blog about it. Yeah.
Okay.
So I not yet have a blog about it.
I think that would be good to read. So do others within your company use the same approach, or do they use something else?
Most of my current colleagues used option 1. So they have just a local IDE with local tools in which there's a lot of time going into setting up all of that.
I see. Yeah, the machine installing all the dependencies, everything for development. I can see that being a huge time sink for many, for sure.
And also the differences between all those laptops it's a potential risk.
Yeah. Okay. Have you seen any issues because of those differences?
In my previous company, we had some differences between package the node dependencies. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. But if the node dependencies were configured correctly, would it still be a problem, do you think?
Yeah, if your node version itself.
Yeah.
I know, and I have friends who work for other companies who also use just option 1, and they had issues. They couldn't reproduce an error which happened in production, and by the time they knew the error, they found it was a environment change.
So like the version that they were running of the runtime, or okay. Yeah. I remember we had one of those, and it was around PostgreSQL. I think Jared was using version 14 or 13, and I was using version 9 or 10, and production was version 12. So everything was like all over the place.
Yeah.
And the CI upgraded automatically because we weren't pinning it. And when that happened, a bunch of stuff started failing because the way the indexes were being built differed, and then things were out of order. So there was like a couple of issues, and finding those things, it always takes a long time. And you think, if I only had these pinned locally in my CI and in production, I wouldn't see these things. But it only happened once.
But there were major versions.
They were major versions, yes. Huge differences, yeah. I mean, Node.js, I think it's a bit like that. I forget what version it's currently running at, but I know some people use like 16 or 12 or 4. They're all over the place, so you don't know what people end up using. And it works, so,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As we are approaching the end of our conversation, I'm wondering, what are the key takeaways that our listeners, you would like them to have?
Yeah, I would say that it's very important to align with your team and your setup with your team, so that everyone has the same base they are building upon. So have a good CI system set up, use proper formatting, and go about how you use Git, for example, in your team. And also, I learned from another podcast a while back, from GitLab, that if you have a discussion with your over Slack or something with someone, just don't hesitate to throw them to create a call, to create a meeting, to discuss it fast. So don't have the whole morning chatting away, while you also could have a quick talk with each other.
So you mean like typed when you talk via Slack messages or GitLab comments, in this case on pull requests? I imagine it works the same way, versus just calling them and hashing it out much quicker than you would over like ping pong. Commenting ping pong. We all know how fun that is. Yeah. And then 3 hours later, why didn't you call me?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Maikel. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. There's a couple of tools which I definitely want to check out. There's a few blog posts from you, or at least a diagram that I'm looking forward to sharing, and also trying to understand myself, especially how GitLab can upgrade itself without any downtime, and ArgoCD as well. I found it really interesting. And I'm very curious to see what happens in, let's say, 6 months from now for you, for your team. How do they, upgrade or, move towards this new world that you're imagining? When you see people using remote Kubernetes and having setups which are closer to production, that's something which I'm a big fan of. And I'm wondering how I can use those tools myself to change things slightly, how I do things, because Vim, from my cold dead hands, I think that's the expression that I'm looking for. Vim forever. And how can I use my local code editor with a setup which is remote and it's as close to production as possible? Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
It's going to be a great learning path for all of us, I think.
Thank you for joining me today, Maikel. Until next time.
Thanks, Gerhard. It was quite fun.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Ship It. Check out our other podcasts for developers at changelog.com/master. You can connect with like-minded developers like Maikel via changelog.com/community. Thank you, Fastly, for the worldwide low-latency changelog.com. Our listeners love those blazing fast MP3s. Your beats are awesome, Breakmaster Cylinder. That's it for this week. See you all next week. My last thought for today is the KubeCon EU 2022 blog post. Among other things, I mentioned some of the upcoming Ship It episodes, which started as hallway conversations. This blog post ships in sync with people returning from their post-conference holidays.